Miracles are a paradox. On one hand, a miracle is by definition an exception to a rule and therefore less likely to actually have happened. On the other hand, if miracles exist, this is precisely what we would expect, and sometimes it is hard to deny just how objectively real some of the occurrences seem. Now, here's a quote by St. Augustine which reads, "Miracles are not contrary to nature, but only contrary to what we know about nature." A good example of this is the rule of gravity. Now, before we had the ability to travel outside of our atmosphere and experience other planetary bodies that didn't have gravity or didn't have it applied in the same way that we do, we really had a universal understanding of it. And it would be hard for us to fathom something that does not consist of the same gravitational force that our planet does. And this same thing goes for, let's say, a man such as myself who did not know that there were all black chickens that literally look like they were covered in black paint. I used to think that all chickens were like one specific side color, and maybe the more extravagant ones had a little bit more brighter or high contrast varieties, but I didn't realize that that existed, and it changed my entire way of thinking about chickens and their colors. Strange example, I know, but yet again, that example should get at the point that's trying to be made here. Now, just a quick disclaimer. I am an agnostic and skeptic of sorts who does not really accept a lot of the miracles that I will be mentioning in this video either. So I'm not here saying I accept these and here's why you should too. I'm just as much of a skeptic as many of you probably are watching this. Now, that is precisely why I am making the video, because I wish to be honest and say that I believe accepting them is reasonable. And while I do not yet believe I have found strong enough reason to, I believe that there are reasonable reasons to, if that makes any logical sense. I know that sounded crazy, but you'll see what I'm talking about. And this is a lot more towards those that don't even consider these things. Now, there are a lot out there who simply ignore the illusions or claimed miracles and instead just say that they are religious fanaticism and that they do not exist or that they can't exist because by definition it's less probable and therefore we should just put them off as they never happened in the first place. For instance, I know that David Hume is famous for coining the idea that a miracle doesn't happen because a miracle is by definition improbable or an exception to nature and therefore something that doesn't happen. I butchered that, but you get the point. It's something in which case a lot of people just by default, ipso facto, reject miracles. Now, as I said, that's not necessarily irrational, but I don't think it's entirely reasonable or honest or open minded, especially for the more agnostic of us skeptics. With that being said, let's go straight into the definition of reasonable to really push back a bit more. Oxford Languages defines it as of a person having sound judgment, fair and sensible, and or as much as is appropriate or fair or moderate. So to be honest, you can be reasonable while being wrong. For instance, for a time it was reasonable to think the earth was flat because we didn't have a way of measuring the earth properly to get the data that we needed. Now, that's not saying it was right, but it was reasonable because that's the data they had and the info they had. Hence why, in some cases, I would also say it is rather reasonable to believe some things that we may not have perfect evidence yet for, but we still find evidence for, even if it's not conclusive, which is the same existence and the same reason that I can say that is reasonable and also the belief of miracles is reasonable. That sounded like a bunch of gibberish, I know, but I'll just continue on and hopefully it'll get clearer as I go. So let's just put an example here. The 33,000 miracles of Saint Charbel, or acclaimed miracles. Acclaimed, I'm not saying, they existed, they are miracles. I'm saying the ones that have been claimed. There are 33,000, or approximately, depending on how you round that number. I'm not sure on the sourcing there. And yet again, you have to ask two questions about this number, about this claim, about this thing, this factoid of people who claim these things, these factoid of testimonies. You have to ask, question one, is it likely that the many accounts that can be found individually are all lies that someone or someone's put together for dishonest reasons? Even if a few or some are simply rumors or exaggerations, is it likely that all 33,000 are? And yet again, it is definitely possible. That's absolutely possible. Just like the miracles of Fatima are possibly naturalistic causes. There are very good theories for that. But is it truly likely, reasonable, sensible to say that? For instance, there may have been one during the Greek times when it was commonly considered that the earth was flat who might have been like, oh, well, what if the earth was round? Well, it's possible, but is it reasonable? And I know that example actually would be a counter against this argument, but at the same time, I'm arguing for the reasonability, not the necessary existence or plausibility of it, as weirdly contradictory as that may sound. And the second question to follow up with that, is it likely or probabilistic that all approximately 33,000 were just naturalistic causes? So out of all of them, there could have been naturalistic explanations, but is it possible that all 33,000 individual ones all had a naturalistic explanation? Especially if we can verify that those are actual testimonies and not 33,000 fabrications? Is it likely that all of them were naturalistic? Especially given the appearances of some of these miracle testimonies. I will read one real quick for you just from the website. There are a lot more on here, but for instance, the testimony of Samira Al-Ghassan. I believe this is someone from, yes, from Lebanon. Forgive me, I'm reading off of here, so I might not look at the camera for a second. But it reads as follows. I experienced a health crisis and was admitted to the Lebanese French hospital, where Dr. Brazil cared for me. After tests and imaging, it was discovered that I had cancer in the lymph nodes and abdomen. I underwent chemotherapy and radiation therapy and later received daily treatment sessions for a month at the American University at Beirut Medical Center following confirmation of the diagnosis via biopsy. Due to the spread of the disease, the doctors decided that surgery was not an option. During this critical time, my sister began praying to Saint Charbel, asking for his intercession with our Lord Jesus Christ. One night, Saint Charbel and the Lord Jesus appeared to her in a dream. The very next day, the PET scans results came in, confirming my complete healing and the disappearance of cancer from my entire body. Follow-up tests repeated several times all showed the same result. I was healed. And et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It talks about how they went and they put the testimony in and attached a full medical report to the testimony for the miracle and sent it over. And you can go down to there's several websites, familyofsaintcharbel.org, for instance, that goes into detail on some of these, and you guys are more than, welcome to look into them yourselves if you'd like. However, the point that I'm trying to make here is not that it is impossible that they are all fabrications, but is it likely or reasonable that they all were? I argue no and yes. Yes, it is possible and therefore reasonable to believe that that is the case if you are going to go with the argument that miracles are impossible because they are exceptions to nature. But if we are to be open-minded and say that, well, because we are open-minded, it is possible that there are exceptions to those natural rules and that miracles do exist, then I think it is also reasonable to accept the existence of these miracles and that they did happen. So you have to ask the question, do I deny it because I think it didn't happen or because I simply presume that it can't? That's a very important distinction to make because we can say that we don't find evidence for something, or we can say that we simply presume all the evidence is wrong because we think that the evidence can't be right, which is somewhat circular. I understand it, but I still think it's a bit circular. So, although we could debate about the probability of it happening, the chance of dishonesty, or naturalistic causes, the truth is that collectively the amount of acclaimed supernatural occurrences without a doubt leads one to suspect it is possible and reasonable that there is something causing or triggering the allegations of such a thing. If 33,000 people said they saw a man at the scene of a crime, there's a good chance that he was there, regardless of whether you thought the man was incapable of crime in the first place. And of course, that's assuming that he was at the scene of the crime and witnessed doing the crime. I didn't clarify there. But with that being said, I think if we keep an open mind, we must consider that such occurrences are at the very least reasonable or plausible. Yet again, that doesn't make them actually true. It just makes it something that we really do have to ponder. Is it likely that the alternative explanations and hypotheses are true, or is it likely that they are as they are claimed and the testimonies are as they were written and not fabrications? There's a lot of different variables to be taken in here, but it is something for everyone who claims to be open-minded to really just hone in on, especially those who have never considered these things before. As I mentioned at the beginning, there are a lot of people who simply don't care about alleged miracles, they don't care about religious views on such things, and they simply denounce them without putting them on the same level as another claim. They will take one claim with far less testimony and totally accept it, but then when it comes to one of those claims with 33,000 uh, testimonies to it, they will just ignore it completely. Now, of course, yet again, we could go into all of those testimonies and see if we can find ones that are inconsistent or wrong or false, and that's totally fine. But to just dismiss it off the bat because you find it impossible for the thing to be possible to have happened, just really isn't that fully consistent in my humble opinion. With that being said, I will discontinue my rambling and allow you guys to get back to whatever you are doing. And hopefully this has helped you guys think a bit more. That's all I really intended to do with this video. I know it's not that very well formed compared to some of my previous ones, which not saying they are either, but it's not as formal. It was more of just a quick talk about something that I was considering while watching a video on capturing Christianity, great little channel talking about the miracle of Fatima, and I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to write a little thing, just throw a bit of a bone to my theism friends. I appreciate and admire so many of them. And in my discernment of faith, I find it to be very fascinating that such things like this even exist. The fact that there are 33,000 testimonies, fake or not, is just so cool, so interesting, so unique, so piquing of my interest, so to speak. But with that being said, I'll let you guys go, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your evening. Good night.